Hello, everyone. I'm Autumn Phillips, editor of the Post and Courier. Welcome to another Beyond the Headlines. We're here again, now for the third time to talk about the Murdaugh case. We're on month 5 of this story that continues and continues and continues. I'm here with Glenn Smith, our project and watchdog editor, and Avery Wilks, a project reporter out of our Columbia Bureau. And they have been breaking news at 6 in the morning, 11:30 at night, keeping everyone informed as this continues. So a couple things before we get started. This is going to be recorded and you will get a link to watch this later if you have to leave early or if you want to share it in your email. Thanks for joining. And you'll see at the bottom there's a Q&A function. You're welcome to ask us questions as we go. Most of the questions that I'm going to ask today came from readers, and the cool thing is we got a lot of them a few days ago, and Glenn and Avery did some reporting to make sure that we had good answers for these questions, and you might hear some things today, well I know you will, that we haven't published yet, so it'll be an interesting conversation. All right, so nearly 5 months since their murder, no one has been arrested for the fatal shooting of Maggie and Paul Murdaugh, mother and son and members of a prominent South Carolina legal family. But in that time, attorney Alec Murdaugh, Maggie's husband and Paul's father, has had a dramatic fall from grace, one that's still unfolding and raising new questions. Among other things, he's been accused of trying to stage a murder, embezzling from his former law firm, stealing $3.4 million from a wrongful death settlement, and abusing opioids for 2 decades. Last week, we learned the state grand jury is investigating the drug pipeline that fed Murdaugh's longtime pill habit, marking at least the 7th ongoing investigation tied to the family since the June double homicide. So let's start there. Glenn, I'm going to start with you. What can you tell us about this latest investigation? What are they looking into, and who's being called to testify?
Yeah, we learned last Friday that the state grand jury was gearing up to start investigating the drug pipeline that fed Alec Murdaugh's opioid habit for some time. We've heard that they've issued subpoenas out in the community to several people who have ties to Murdaugh, possibly supplied him with drugs during this time. We have heard that they identified some of these folks because Murdaugh took the unusual step of writing checks to drug dealers to secure the pills, which is pretty unusual, but I've heard that some folks sort of went along with that because he was kind of considered Teflon down there in Hampton County, and that the family kind of, they controlled prosecutions there for decades, powerful law firm, and he was buying large quantities of drugs for tens of thousands of dollars, we've heard. So we broke that story late Friday. A little bit after that, the state newspaper reported that there possibly could be some ties to the gang called the Cowboys down in the Walterboro area. Heard some mixed reports on that, but the Cowboys have been a gang down there tied into drug trafficking. They've also been tied into some drive-by shootings, and more memorably, a homicide at a nightclub in St. George that took the life of an innocent woman. So we're still pursuing angles on that. Grand jury is supposed to start convening for testimony in the middle of this month.
All right, thanks, Glenn. This one's for you, Avery. Tell us, where is Alec Murdaugh now? Has he completed his drug rehab? And what's the status of his psychiatric evaluation?
Apologies if you guys heard my dog Scoop barking. The FedEx guy came through, and she doesn't like him very much. So she kind of lost her mind there, and I had to mute myself. Anyway, getting back to the subject at hand, Alec Murdaugh is living in the Alvin S. Glenn Detention Center, which is the Richland County Jail. He has stayed there for about 3 weeks now. Since he was arrested in connection with allegations that he stole money from the estate of his late housekeeper and nanny. He is living in a medical bay there, but he isn't receiving any sort of treatment for his opioid addiction or getting really any crazy special treatment. From what I've been told by his attorneys, he essentially just lives in a cell and often doesn't come out for days on end while he awaits a judge to decide whether he should continue to stay in the Richland County Jail as his trial is, or as he awaits trial, or whether he can be released and go receive more opioid addiction treatment. And as far as the status of his evaluation, again, a judge detained him until he could have a psychiatric evaluation that determines whether he is suicidal, whether he's a danger to the community. That has been completed, and that has been shipped off to Judge Clifton Newman, but he is yet to make a determination. It's sort of unclear at this point whether he's going to hold a follow-up bond hearing to discuss the case more and then make a decision, or whether he'll just issue an order either requiring Murdaugh to be detained further or releasing him immediately. So we're all still waiting for the next step to happen, but he does have the results of that evaluation.
Glenn, so why did attorneys ask to freeze Alec's assets? What's at stake there? Why did the judge rule the way he did? Are there any indications he or his family were trying to offload their possessions, as we've heard?
Yes, so there were three attorneys. There's all, in addition to all Alec Murdaugh's criminal proceedings and problems, he's got some civil lawsuits against him, and attorneys in three of those suits, three separate suits, asked judge to put a freeze on his assets because they were very concerned that though he is in jail, he still has the ability to get rid of assets, possibly by hiding them in unknown accounts, because he's been accused of having a fake bank account and siphoning money there, or through other methods. His son Buster, his remaining son, has been granted control over his affairs. So even though he's in jail, there's some opportunity, or was some opportunity, to move those assets. And the attorneys submitted several documents to support their concerns over this. One was a photo of his son Buster gambling in Vegas in October. They also provided some evidence showing nearly $1 million mortgage on a property that a property owner paid off to Alex Murdaugh, an online listing asking $114,000 for Murdaugh's boat, and a nearly 2-year-old unpaid tax bill that could lead to auction of Murdaugh's beach home on Edisto Island. Around the same time, two of his former partners, one being his brother, another a prominent attorney in the firm, also filed suit against him, saying that they had loaned him over $500,000. He said he was in need of some money to cancel out some things. His bank account was overdrawn. They had not seen the majority of that money, and Buster apparently had provided the brother with a tractor to pay off some of this money, but there's still about $46,000 of this debt remaining. So there's this notion that things are being put up for sale or moved around and debts are mounting. So the attorneys were looking to freeze those assets in place so they're not gone by the time they get a judgment in the case.
Okay. Avery's, let's keep talking about money. Murdaugh's attorneys have said he siphoned off money to support a 20-year opioid addiction, but some people question what evidence exists to support that claim. Why are people suspicious, and what evidence have we seen to indicate he did have a pill habit?
Well, people are suspicious for a whole lot of reasons. One is that no one who has known Murdaugh for years, and he was a very well-connected guy, says that they knew anything about an opioid addiction. They didn't see any signs of addiction. That they, his law firm put out a statement saying that they'd sort of polled their attorneys and law partners, and none of them had seen any signs. His family said the same thing. Then there's also the matter that Murdaugh has lied before and has really damaged his own credibility, especially by claiming that he was shot by an unknown assailant over Labor Day weekend, when he, in fact, would later confess to enlisting a hitman to shoot him. So you've got the combination of those two things, and also the fact that his attorneys have said that he spent millions of dollars maintaining this opioid habit. And if you talk to people who have gone through opioid addiction, they'll tell you that there's no way you could spend that much money on those pills unless you were taking enough to kill a rhinoceros on a daily basis. And maybe he was, but that's why there's plenty of suspicion about that. However, there is some evidence to support that he does have a serious opioid addiction. When he was admitted to a hospital after that Labor Day weekend shooting, he tested positive for opiates and barbiturates. His lawyer said that there are checks showing that he was writing, that he was sending large amounts of money to people that they claim were his drug dealers. And now, as Glenn and I first reported, the state grand jury is investigating where he got the drugs. And certainly, the state grand jury, a very powerful investigative body, would not have been convened if state investigators didn't have good reason to believe that he was getting large amounts of drugs from somewhere. So the fact that there's an ongoing and powerful investigation looking into where those drugs came from, what that pipeline looks like, does indicate that at least people who have been following this very closely believe that to be the case.
Yeah, I'll jump in real quick too. The medical records, I believe, from the hospital showed that he stated that he was using opioids recreationally, and that he had complained that the painkillers they were giving him weren't strong enough, which could be a suggestion that his tolerance had gone up. Some folks we spoke to in connection with this latest investigation too seem to suggest that he was paying a premium for the pills, that he was paying top dollar for these things way in excess of street value, and that could explain how he went through such vast sums of money.
Yeah, and like you said about the hospital records, it shows that he for days was pacing around, begging nurses to let him use a phone that he was asking to be released. It certainly seemed like someone who, and he was complaining that the sort of the cocktail of three painkillers he was being given wasn't helping at all, and he's still in a great deal of pain. So certainly those are signs of someone who was taking a lot more of those painkillers on a regular basis.
We have a question in the chat. I don't know if you can answer or not. It says, didn't he test positive for meth as well? And didn't Mr. Smith, and I know we're going to talk about that case later, but didn't Mr. Smith go to jail for distribution of meth before being transferred to Hampton County? Can either of you answer that question? Or
I don't know if he tested positive for meth. I don't think I saw that in the hospital records. I could have missed that or forgotten it. But Curtis Smith, actually, the first charge that he was rung up on was possession of meth and other drugs. Believe that SLED, when they were investigating the Labor Day weekend shooting, they were trying to get Smith on a charge of shooting Murdaugh, but first they brought him in on this sort of separate, possibly unrelated charge, and that's how they were able to bring him in and get him talking about what happened that day.
There was, I know the hospital records indicated that in addition to opioids, he tested positive for barbiturates. And with Smith, they did ring him up on that meth charge to bring him in. If you look at his prior criminal record, it's really nothing but driving offenses.
okay. So here we are, we're talking about 7 different investigations going on, but this whole thing started with a double homicide that night. Can you tell me where, Glenn, you want to tell me where that investigation sits?
I'd love to tell you where that sits, but no one's saying anything about that. SLED has said almost nothing since this thing has occurred. They told people off the bat that they shouldn't be worried. There was no danger to the community, which confused people because they felt, well, if someone's running around with at least 2 long guns, isn't that a danger to the community if you haven't caught them yet? And they have not responded to that. Avery just this week approached SLED trying to get some clarification. Readers in the advanced questions raised that question again and again. How come they said that and they haven't clarified that? And they came back and they said, we're not going to talk about that. We're not going to tell you anything that you asked. Avery actually bundled a whole pile of questions for SLED to answer from readers, and they said nothing, right? That basically?
They said sort of the same thing they've been saying, which is, we're following all leads, and we'll follow the facts wherever they go, and urging the public to be patient and wait on SLED to come to their conclusions. So it's essentially sort of the same boilerplate statement that we're getting for a lot of questions for SLED right now.
Yeah. So basically, we know that Alec supposedly comes home, finds the bodies, calls the authorities. They're outside. They're near some dog kennels on the property. Each have been shot with different guns. Paul with a shotgun, and Maggie supposedly with an AR, sort of military style rifle. But beyond that, I mean, don't know much. I know Alec's attorneys indicated a while back that they were pursuing a parallel investigation and had some possible leads on suspects. Haven't heard anything more from them either on that, or how that's going, or whether they've turned over anyone to SLED. It's really been radio silent since June.
Glenn, I know Alec has been listed as a person of interest. Can you talk about what that means, or?
You can read what you want into that. I mean, he would be a person of interest in just about any criminal investigation, right? Because he's the one who found the bodies. And there's a lot of speculation swirling around, and clearly law enforcement in cases like this do tend to look at people closest, the husband, the wife, the son, the daughter, because that, percentage wise, that is oftentimes where the trail leads them. It's much rarer to see a stranger homicide in this country. But beyond that, they really haven't said. They've certainly not put that out there as SLED hasn't come out and said that. Different people have reported that, and Alec's attorneys have confirmed that he's a person of interest, but exactly what that means is open to speculation, just like so many other facts of this case.
And Murdaugh's attorneys have said on the record that they seem to be frustrated with the direction of SLED's probe so far, and they have indicated that they think that SLED is sort of operating under the assumption that it was Alec Murdaugh who killed his wife and son, and that they haven't been that interested in pursuing other leads, which is why one of the reasons that they started their own parallel investigation, which, as Glenn said, has been very private. And all that they've said about that investigation, at least in the past month or so, is that they haven't turned over any findings, any suspects, anything like that to SLED. But otherwise, they've been very quiet about what they're learning, or what different leads they might be pursuing in that investigation.
I don't know if you can answer this or not. I'll just throw it out there if you can. This is from a reader, and it's really about the status of the missing gun, or the guns. Do we know anything about that, or in your pack of questions to SLED?
That was one of the questions I sent to SLED was, there's been a lot of talk about what types of guns were used, whether they belong to the Murdaugh family or not. And SLED really hasn't released a lot of information on that from the beginning. That was among that list of 10 or 12 questions I sent to SLED, and that they did not address. So still waiting to hear more about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, a number I could add too. I mean, early on, a number of people who knew the family, familiar with the case, said Paul owned a AR rifle, often carried it with him in his truck. There was, I heard from some people that it went missing shortly before this happened. Then other people said, no, that's not the case. He still had that in his possession. It's apparently gone now. Whether that's the same gun, whether it has anything to do with the case, nobody's sure. I mean, keep in mind, this is a hunting lodge that's just, stacked with guns. So that's what people go there to do.
Yeah. Avery, why don't I ask you a little bit more about the money and kind of how the scheme works? So he's accused of a few things. Alec Murdaugh. He's accused of stealing money from the law firm, and he's also accused of stealing maybe at least $3.4 million from this wrongful death settlement related to his late housekeeper. So can you talk us through how that worked, how he might have been able to do that, or what people think?
Yeah, it's really fascinating. It's something I've never heard of in several years of covering courts and dealing with lawyers all over South Carolina. Basically, how the scheme allegedly worked, and this is according to lawyers for the Satterfield family, as well as the state attorney general's office and SLED, who arrested Murdaugh in connection with this alleged crime, is that after the death of Gloria Satterfield, who was the Murdaugh family's longtime nanny and housekeeper, she was said to have tripped and fallen on the steps at their home and died a few weeks later at the hospital. Murdaugh approached her sons and encouraged them to file a wrongful death claim against him so that they could get some money, that could help them after her death. And then he encouraged them to hire Corey Fleming, who is a Beaufort lawyer and one of Murdaugh's best friends, someone he had known since college, the godfather of Murdaugh's son, Paul. And the Satterfield family didn't know about that connection. They just thought this is a good attorney. They hired him. They're said to be very trusting people who don't ask a lot of questions. A few months later, Satterfield persuades, or not Satterfield, Fleming, their attorney, persuades the Satterfields to turn over the responsibility of managing their mother's estate to a banker named Chad Westendorf. And then shortly after they do that, Westendorf and Fleming come up with this $500,000 settlement. It's the first of two settlements in the case. And so they've got this pot of money ostensibly negotiated through insurance providers for the family. Later, they come up with another pot of money from another insurance provider. And so the total amount of the two settlements reaches $4.3 million. A cut of that, more than $1 million, is for attorney's fees. Some of it is for Westendorf, the banker, but the rest of it is about $3.4 million that should have gone to Satterfield's sons, her family. What actually happened, again, according to investigators and Satterfield's attorneys, is the banker and the attorney didn't tell anything to the Satterfield family about these two settlements, and none of the money reached the family. Instead, Murdaugh directed them to send the money to a bank account called Forge. And it was a bank account owned by Murdaugh that he had disguised to make it look like Forge Consulting, which is a legitimate financial firm based in Atlanta that handles structured settlements and payments. So the money gets sent to this bank account and then it disappears. And essentially, Murdaugh makes off with it. He starts cutting checks to himself, to people he owes debts to, et cetera. And none of it reached the Satterfield family. So they learned about that, in the past year and filed a lawsuit and uncovered all of that evidence. But that is a fairly complex scheme. I've talked to a lot of lawyers. None of them said they'd heard anything like that. And that's what the FBI is very interested in, because FBI and federal investigators are very good at uncovering white collar crime, public corruption, these kind of schemes. And so they've entered the investigation specifically to look into that type of crime. What's interesting as well, and I hate to ramble, but Alec's law firm, PNPED in Hampton, they've alleged that basically Murdaugh did the same thing that he did to the Satterfields, but to them and to his own clients. He used that Forge bank account to siphon money that should have gone to the firm, that should have gone to his legal clients, and he'd been doing that for years. So it's fascinating that you've got these two separate unaffiliated entities alleging the same exact type of scheme against the same person.
I have a few questions showing up in the chat. It's still on the Satterfield case. Glenn, you want to try to take a swing at these? So you talked about the settlement. What do we know about the actual slip and fall accident, the cause of her death? Do we know anything?
Yeah, so that's been another fascinating aspect of this, because SLED announced that it was both investigating what happened at the settlement, which has attracted a great deal of attention, obviously, because of the size of the money involved in the scheme, but also into how she died, the manner of her death. It's been very mysterious. What little we've seen in terms of paperwork, there was a partial settlement claim that was filed with the court in late 2018 that indicated that she had died or after an accident in Hampton County, but it didn't say where. But the insurance company for Alec Murdaugh was going to be paying on that. So we initially, when we saw that document, went to Hampton County authorities, went to the coroner's office, the sheriff's office, EMS, and said, let's get some records on what happened during that call. And all of them came back and said, we got nothing. Never even notified about this. So found out that Ms. Satterfield died at Trident Hospital in North Charleston, called the Charleston County Coroner's Office. They had no paperwork on that, suggesting that, well, if she had died in a physician's care, the physician probably would have signed the death certificate on that and not involved our office. I checked with the coroner's office again down at Hampton, and she got very curious and began calling around to some of her counterparts. She couldn't find anything more about it. Then she got a hold of the death certificate, which said that Ms. Satterfield died from natural causes, which seemed to, contradict what we had heard, that she had either tripped over the family dogs or fell in some way down the stairs at the family home. Then it comes out that the accident itself apparently didn't happen in Hampton County, where the claim was filed, but actually in Colleton County at Mizell, the hunting lodge, where Paul and Maggie were shot to death. So there's just so many questions swirling around this thing. We'd found messages on one of the son's Facebook pages from that time period, which certainly indicates that his mom had some sort of an accident and grievous injury, and he's pulling for her, and then she just succumbs to that. But the details around that are just so murky.
I have one more question. Hold on. Let's see, related to the Satterfield. Why hasn't Westendorf been held accountable for his part?
So Chad Westendorf, who again was the banker at Palmetto State Bank, who was accused of handling he was accused of representing the Satterfield estate and sort of letting this all happen. He was actually dismissed from the lawsuit at Corey Fleming's request. Fleming settled the case after the allegations were brought against him by the Satterfield family. He paid back all the legal fees that he had earned from the case. His malpractice insurance paid from what we were told, the full extent of its policy, and he had to admit that he made significant mistakes, even though he did also blame Murdaugh for tricking him and said that he wasn't aware and he wasn't a co-conspirator in this scheme. And Westendorf never made any kind of public statement, but he was dismissed from the case. And at the same time, the case still includes his employer, Palmetto State Bank, as a defendant. So it looks like the Satterfield family is trying to hold the bank itself accountable. Meanwhile, the bank has filed its own claims in court, and it said it had no idea, it had no involvement in this case, that Westendorf wasn't working in his professional capacity as vice president of that bank when he handled this case. And that if the lawsuit does go forward against them, they pointed the finger back at Fleming and said, Fleming should have handled this as a lawyer who was handling it. So there's been a ton of finger pointing around this case, but so far Westendorf, just to recap, has been dismissed from the case, but his employer, the Palmetto State Bank, is one of the few remaining defendants who are either going to have to settle this case or take it to court.
To everybody who's on, I just wanted to say, so it's 12:28. We said we would stop this at 12:30, but we have a bunch of questions coming in. We had collected some questions from people, so I might keep it going a few more minutes. Remember, this is recorded, so you'll get an email with the link if you have to go ahead and leave. But I think we are going to go just a few minutes over. That's all right. So this is another question for you, Avery. We have a few questions in here about Buster. Two things. One, is Buster a person of interest? Two, Where is he? And do you know anything about what he's going through, or what do we know?
Sure. We don't know whether Buster is a person of interest. Again, that's because SLED is not answering really any questions about the investigation itself. The only reason we know that his father, Alec Murdaugh, is a person of interest is because his attorneys admitted it in TV interviews and elsewhere. So we don't know whether Buster is a suspect, a person of interest, a witness. We have no idea. What we do know is that Buster has tried somewhat unsuccessfully to lay low in the months since all this started happening. He's been spotted and photographed in Vegas at a casino, at the Carolina football game in Tennessee, at his family's Edisto Beach house by tabloid photographers. But otherwise, he hasn't made any public statements about all of this. I'm told that he's living with his girlfriend at times. He's living with his uncle at times. That when he was in Las Vegas, it was actually part of a pre-planned fall break vacation in which his uncle's family went out to Vegas and went four-wheeling in Arizona, et cetera. But in the meantime, he has also been given power over his father's estate and finances and assets. And some of the attorneys suing Alex Murdaugh were alarmed to see that Buster was settling debts, paying off mortgages, selling property, selling stakes in various clubs. And so they were deeply concerned that he was acting on his father's orders or acting on his own and trying to hide money, hide assets, and try to limit the family, what the family may end up having to fork over as part of the lawsuits against it. So recently, that was why a judge froze those assets and appointed a pair of independent attorneys to sort of be guardians over that estate. But other than all of that, Buster is somewhat doing a successful job of laying low and staying under the radar.
Avery, you want to talk a little bit about the FBI coming in? You talked about it before, but we've reported that the FBI has entered the investigation, about the financial accusations. So what is it that they bring to the table? And do you have any idea why they weren't brought in sooner?
Yeah, so the FBI and state investigators, SLED, they're good at different things. SLED is very good at investigating violent crime. They handle almost every officer-involved shooting in South Carolina. They have investigators that are sort of jack of all trades. They can investigate all different kinds of crimes, but they don't have a whole lot of specialists who only look at financial crimes or only look at a specific type of white-collar crime. That's where the FBI comes in. They're very good at they have accountants who double as investigators. They're really experienced in bringing these really complex cases against organizations, RICO cases, things like that. They also have the benefit of the federal grand jury, which can subpoena documents. It can subpoena bank records, tax returns. I mean, they're really good at following the money, seeing where it leads, finding other co-conspirators, et cetera. So that is sort of what they bring to the table. That's why when they entered the investigation, it wasn't, necessarily to try to find out who killed Maggie and Paul or to investigate the Stephen Smith case. It was because there are complex crimes being alleged here that are financial crimes, fraudulent bank accounts, et cetera. And the feds are uniquely and especially gifted and they have the authority to go after those. So I don't exactly know. I don't think really anyone does, or at least if they do, they're not talking about it, what the relationship is between SLED and the feds. Whether SLED has said, okay, we'll take the deaths of Maggie and Paul, we'll take the Stephen Smith case, and we'll go look at that, and then you guys handle the financial crimes. It may be that they're partnering on those crimes and they're sort of looking into them together. A lot of times in these joint state and federal investigations, it's actually good to have both an FBI agent and a SLED agent in the same room because it is a federal crime to lie to an FBI agent. So that gives the SLED agent a little bit more authority just to have the FBI agent in the same room. So we don't know because no one's talking, at least publicly, about sort of what the dynamic is between those, whether there's any sort of a turf battle between SLED and the FBI about specific parts of the case and who gets credit on what. But we do know that in the past, for example, the DC Summer investigation, they've worked together and, been able to bring cases together. So it'll be interesting in the coming weeks to see sort of how that evolves.
Let's see, Glenn, this one's for you. And I'll just kind of make this maybe our second to last question. So we have quite a few questions in the chat about the Stephen Smith case. Mm-hmm. We keep hearing about a connection between the death of Stephen Smith a few years ago, and his death is connected to the Murdaugh family. But what is the connection? And where does the investigation in that case stand? What can you tell us about that?
So, yeah, Stephen Smith was found dead on a rural highway in Hampton back in 2015. And initially, people on the scene thought he'd been shot in the head because he had a head injury. It was later determined that it wasn't a head injury at all, but blunt force trauma. A pathologist speculated that the wound was caused by a hit and run accident, perhaps, like a truck coming by and the side mirror catching him in the back of the head. The lead investigator on the Highway Patrol investigation strongly disputed that contention because there weren't skid marks or pain or any of the things you'd see normally in a hit and run type accident or some sort of collision. But the initial confusion over what had happened to him led to some gaps and confusion over who had authority. Was it the Highway Patrol? Was it SLED? Was it local folks? And they finally got it sorted out, but they never did quite agree on what happened to him. Now, after Paul and Maggie's death in June, SLED announced shortly after that new information that they had uncovered as a result of the double homicide investigation had led them to open a new investigation into the Stephen Smith case. They've said very little since. We got the Highway Patrol case files on that, and the Murdaugh name pops up throughout the case files in different ways. Some people passing along rumors about possible relations between some members of the Murdaugh family and Stephen Smith. There was a suggestion that one of the Murdaugh attorneys had reached out to the family right after the death, offering to represent them, and that he had encouraged someone else to come forward with information. There were various tips that somehow someone named Murdaugh possibly was involved or connected to what happened to Stephen Smith. And then there's been a really vibrant rumor mill surrounding this whole thing, with a lot of speculation centering on Paul Murdaugh, who was shot to death along with his mom. Just recently, though, attorney Andy Savage, who represents the family of Stephen Smith, came out and said that he and his investigators have been looking into this as well, and they do not see a connection, despite some of the media focus on this, do not see a connection to Murdaugh. And then he later clarified that he meant Paul Murdaugh. He said that they have uncovered some things that they're passing along to SLED. SLED indicated, this was in an interview with a local TV station, Channel 4, and SLED indicated that they are making progress in the case, but declined to say anything more than that. Again, we went to SLED and asked them, what more can you tell us? And took a number of questions readers had, and they said, sorry, we're not going to talk about any of this with you. So that's why it's all swirling around there. And conclusive links have been a little hard to come by, and it's tough to parse out some of the rumors from some of the facts in here.
Okay, this is my last question. Maybe this is for Avery. As we look at, there's the story, but then there's also kind of what it reveals about maybe loopholes or problems with the law or problems with our system that could be fixed. So, maybe specifically the Satterfield case, what is it that all this has revealed to us? And are there things that can be fixed from stopping it, to stop it from happening?
Well, I certainly learned a lot about how the legal profession works in some of these cases, and sort of the lack of transparency there is regarding settlements, where the money goes, who gets paid what. I was shocked to learn that some of these settlement documents, the orders, just dictating how the money should be spread around, were just never filed. Were never put in a public record format. And so it's remarkable that the family for whom this money was negotiated, they were as in the dark as anyone else about where the money was going. They didn't even know, according to their lawyers, that these two settlements have been negotiated on their behalf. So that's been a serious question. The idea that a lawyer could sort of, on the benefit of his reputation, ask another lawyer to send the money to this random account called Forge, and it's remarkable that we've got a case where the defendant in a case is dictating where the money goes after a judgment was issued or a settlement was resolved on his behalf. Those are very serious matters, and after covering lawyers and courts for several years in South Carolina, I had no idea that was even possible. And I've talked to several lawyers who said they had no idea either. There's said to be potential investigations into lawyers as part of all of this. And we've reported several times that our system of investigating complaints and ethical misconduct against lawyers and judges is extremely opaque, not transparent at all. Sometimes those complaints can linger unresolved for years at a time without any idea of whether they're really being investigated or how thoroughly they're being investigated. So I think there are a lot of systems in South Carolina, particularly, that could use some more transparency, some more sunlight. And I think these cases are providing pretty good examples of that.
Yeah, specifically on that case as well. Take, for instance, the final judgment that was written off. We see the partial judgment or partial settlement appear in the court records, but not the final settlement, which was handled by Circuit Judge Carmen Mullen. And initially, one of the attorneys involved, Eric Bland, involved for the Satterfield family, wanted to depose the judge and find out exactly how that deal went down, and question her about such things as, look, here she had recused herself from a previous lawsuit involving the family, legal matters involving the family, and then in this instance decided to sit on that. Was because it was a non-contested matter? I don't know. She went to law school, graduated in the same class as Corey Fleming, Alec Murdaugh. There's a whole bunch of questions swirling around this. Eric Bland wanted to call her into court, depose her, and ask her these. Tremendous pushback because judges traditionally are not called in to undergo questioning, and people feel it's highly inappropriate to do so. When he backed off of that, what basically happened is that shifted into the court administration realm, where they will be reviewing any complaints or any inconsistencies or anything that happened there. And in all likelihood, we'll never know anything about this because even the complaints being filed is secret. The outcome is secret unless there's some sort of a edict that comes down of, some sort of a punishment, but otherwise, which is extremely, extremely rare in the state to begin with. So as Avery said, it's tremendously opaque.
All right, well, we went 12 minutes over. Thanks for taking all these questions. Remember, this is recorded. It'll show up in your email. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. All of these stories we send out through our newsletters. You can get our morning newsletter, evening, and then of course we have a breaking news newsletter that goes right to your inbox. If you want to sign up, it's postandcourier.com/newsletter sign up. And if you're not a subscriber, please consider subscribing. postandcourier.com/subscribe. Thank you.